Brexit must mean control of the number of people who come to Britain.
Bloody paper complaining about immigration again.
I don't know why you buy that paper.
Because I agree with it.
As we distance ourselves from Europe post-Brexit, it seems as if there's an atmosphere that outsiders aren't welcome anymore.
If you have an uncontrolled flow, the hopes of people assimilating and becoming part of one society are virtually impossible.
Let me tell you, if you think that because we're Christians and I'm holding this cross, that you can come here, you can lie in our faces, and that you can attack our people.
Great Britain has a problem. As far as I'm concerned, we're at war.
Speak proper English then.
Is it a British problem or an Indian problem?
No, I think it is a British problem. First of all, because there is so much historical amnesia about what the empire really entailed. The fact that you don't really teach colonial history in your schools. There's no real awareness. The fact that Britain came to one of the richest countries in the world and reduced it after 200 years of plunder to one of the poorest. But I think we do need to be aware of history because, as I often say to young people, if you don't know where you've come from, how will you appreciate where you're going?
1947. British rule on the Indian subcontinent formally came to an end.
One distinct community in West London is home to waves of migrations from South Asia that make it one of the most diverse towns in the UK. Southall on Film is a year-long heritage project that explores the relationship between the town's South Asian community and film. Through research, conducting interviews with lifelong Southall residents and making films inspired by their stories, a group of young people discovered a South Asian legacy in Southall that they never knew about.
The importance of heritage is everything, because if we don't have heritage, then what stories have we got to tell? No, I heard something recently that said the only thing new in this life is the history that you don't know yet.
People have this notion that history is something in big, dusty books or in the archives or Google. Our contention was that just open your front door, step outside, and that's your history, that's your heritage.
When my parents first moved to this country, they kind of settled in the Southall area.
My dad came in 1981. He obviously joined my mum, and then they, settled in the area.
My dad passed away when my brother and I were really young, so my mum was just showering us with love, and I think a lot of our culture sort of got forgotten.
I grew up in a predominantly Asian area. English people are the ones that felt kind of out of place.
I was born in Hong Kong, Indian, but I hold a British passport and a lot of my culture is British, the way I speak, the food I eat, the way I dress. So where is home?
So growing up was quite a confusion of cultures and a clash because I didn't know where I belonged, whether I was British Asian or just Asian that was born in England.
So I was born and raised in Southall and I have a huge love for it. I struggled with that at times myself, learning to love a place that might not always seem like it's the nicest or the kindest place, but you just kind of have to look for the beauty.
This project started off at a research and development stage, and that involved young people going to explore archives at the local history centre. Their findings helped to shape this heritage documentary and the production of several short films. So what we're sitting in right now is the film set and exhibition space developed in collaboration with BFI Future Film.
We were sort of given this scope to write a short based in Southall between sort of the 1960s to the 1990s. And then the more and more I researched, we found out that Southall had its own studio where they were filming loads and loads of movies, and the cinema and the film industry is why Southall Broadway exists.
We researched the cinemas, the people, the divide, basically, when it started becoming predominantly Asian. Microfilm, I think it's called. So that shows newspaper snippets. So we've got to see headlines of important dates and times, which is really important for the backdrop of the short. Because of course we're gonna put in key information here and there.
It's almost like a networking hub. With collaboration, you're making something out of it that ultimately is your own work.
So if you're a director, writer, this is an opportunity for you to use the research. It doesn't matter if you don't know anything about Southall. That's irrelevant. The point is, with this project, is that you understand the research methodology and you're able to go through the archives and explore and do research and really get in depth with conversations of people who were from that time.
We interviewed former and current residents of Southall to discuss their memories of watching films in cinemas and on VHS at home.
It's not a history lesson per se. It's more about using some of the stories from the oral history interviews that you do and creating something new and something fresh from that.
So it's important for people to share their stories, their own stories that they've had, the dual identity, community, social issues, whatever they've gone through, because you will connect with other people and you can help those people as well.
I think I lost a lot of my heritage from growing up in a very white populated school and area, and essentially I've missed out on a lot of who I am and where I'm from, and because I haven't really had any Indian friends. Anything to do with my Indian culture was brought up, I would just like disengage, didn't want anything to do with it. There was a period where I actually didn't want to eat curry.
I've always wanted to do media since like high school, and like everyone's always pushed me away from it. So I feel like by doing this project, I'm finally doing what I want to do.
This project, I heard about it and I got really excited by it, by the fact that it was based on something just down the road from me, Southall, in which I felt quite alien. And I thought, I can melt the two together, learn more about my culture and still be creative and working in the industry.
So this is a perfect project for me. Combines my love for filmmaking, it combines my love for culture, and it combines my love for Southall, all in one.
I had no exposure to Southall, so this was all really new for me. I'd been there to go to the shops for weddings and things like that to pick out jewellery with my mum. Didn't really have a full idea or understanding of what Southall was about.
Growing up, I don't think Southall ever felt like London because it was just a world of its own. But I did always feel this stigma of, oh, you know, she comes from Southall, or when friends ask, oh, where are you from? Okay, she lives in Southall. And in some cases, it also felt like the cliches were almost a little bit uneducated because of that.
I'm an original Southall boy. A lot of the people who were brought up in Southall, they pretended they lived in Uxbridge or Harrow or Hounslow because Southall was not the place to be for all sorts of reasons, you know. People saw it as a ghetto, but I didn't care.
It's very sad to hear what people are thinking about Southall, because in the 70s and 80s in Europe, they were looking towards Britain and particularly Southall as the beacons of, you know, cutting-edge politics and informative politics that strive to change establishment as such. And I think we did that. Actually, I think if we didn't do that, I don't think we would be sitting here.
Southall is very rare in the world. I think possibly the only place outside South Asia that gives them a sense of homeland.
Southall's a town always of change, of communities who are sort of transient, in one day, gone the next. And we're just seeing another cycle of change. It's just that those cycles are becoming more and more rapid now than they were when I was a boy.
The situation at the moment is very, very good. The Asian population that has moved in have made it even better, really.
I think the cliche of people in the United Kingdom of community is you sort of know people, but you won't know them by their first name. Places like Southall, I think, are different. When there's an outsider threat, Southall gets together, they learn how to be a community and look after not just themselves, but each other.
Sikhs or Hindus or Muslims, or they're coming from Pakistan, they're coming from India, they're coming from Punjab. They love to stay in Southall because they feel just like their own country from back home. There are many other places also, but Southall is a very different place.
I think it was dubbed Little Punjab really early on. My parents really loved going there, not just because you could get stuff, but they felt home, they had family you could drop into. You'd always bump into someone on Southall Broadway. And as a child, I think the thing I remembered the most was just the colours and the vibrancy. Only having visited India twice when I was young, it really did remind me of that, you know, kind of home from home.
I can remember like all the different smells that were coming from there. There was a lot of like fruit and veg shops, a lot of like Asian clothing wear and things like that. I could like identify with like the food, the music, the language. This is my town. I grew up here and everything, so I'll always be part of Southall. I can't really think of going anywhere else.
You can see stories and characters that have been through so much, and they're eventually in a place where maybe they can just finally just focus on living and building.
So when it comes to discussing things like past race tensions in Southall, when we're looking at problems that exist right now, when it comes to, you know,
immigration, and Brexit, and how there seems to be this atmosphere where outsiders almost aren't welcomed, and barriers are now being put up again and reinforced when we thought that they were breaking down. I think it's really important for someone from a minority, quote unquote, to have a voice and express thoughts and opinions.
My mum came to England at a very young age, didn't speak a word of English, has done amazingly well for herself. And school, even though, you know, she was picked on, like everyone goes through some sort of struggle.
1964, that's the year I came, there were no more than 4,000 to 5,000 Indians. Racism was at its peak.
When the Asian population first came here, there was an awful lot of the indigenous population that weren't happy with it.
I personally have seen houses where there were notices, no Bogs, no Irish, no Tinkers.
Already in the 1960s, there were immigration acts, rather like we have today, blocking immigrant arrivals. There was a very strong antipathy developing, which is a discourse that is carried on today.
I came from airport and saw many Indian people without turban. So I thought they might be Hindu or Muslim. My husband said, no, they all are Sikhs, because at that time, they didn't want any person with turban. So they had to take out the turban.
I suppose when we were doing sports, Asian girls were always the last to be picked up. Always the last.
When I was at school, we couldn't really walk up Lady Margaret Road towards Greenford because we would get beaten up. We just were very careful where we went in terms of, you know, our urban environment. So in a sense, we felt physically safe in Southall.
Every day, we would have a group of white, what looked like adults, but they were probably teenagers, who would come to our house. My dad would be away working, so my mum couldn't speak English. 3 young children. I was 4, and they were younger. And they'd throw stones at the house, they'd shout, they'd swear, they were aggressive. But that was a horrible time. But it stays with you. And then we moved to Southall. We came into Southall border, and it was peace.
My mum said this word, teddy boys, and it was quite interesting because that's very much a term of the 50s and 60s. My parents never let go of that term because for them it was about hostile, angry, young, racist, abusive white men. And we were terrified because we would be spat on in the road. They would swear at us and the terms were horrible. You know, it was like wog and coon, nigger and packy, of course, a bit later. They couldn't even be bothered to work out the difference between black people and us, and we were all niggers, you know. But the fear of being hit physically by them, the fear of them ganging up on you, beaten up, often people were beaten up. When the world outside is saying, we are the right and you are the wrong, you internalise that, so you become the wrong one constantly. Busing was this wonderful initiative by the inherently racist Ealing Council, where the local schools were so filled with Asians as they thought that they would start busing them out to other areas. And it was awful. And they would pile on these coaches and then they would be driven out somewhere to school. In the winter months it was dark, but it remains as the feeling of it is as a really dark blot.
One Asian lad by the name of Gurdeep Singh Chaggar, he was stabbed to death.
The National Front was smuggled into the town hall through a back street.
And that led to a large congregation of young people to demonstrate.
The Dominion Cinema in Southall. This is a space where people converge, not just to watch films, but there were also political meetings. The Southall youth movement used to meet in this space. They used to tackle and grapple with issues of racism and the National Front, which were a continual threat to the South Asian diaspora on a daily basis. So the Dominion was almost like a sanctuary for conversations at broach these various everyday themes that people, ordinary everyday people, had to face. The bullying in schools, the violent attacks on the street.
So when we were doing our research, we realized how cinema was so vital for people in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, just as a way for them to connect and feel like a bit of their culture was still around them.
Totally, completely. My sense of being an Indian, an Asian, came from film.
Particularly Indian cinema is escapist. I mean, that's the whole reason why it had the success that it's had over the years in the 80s and 90s. Now India is making much more challenging films, not necessarily, see, for me, Bollywood is a genre within the Indian film industry. It's not the Indian film industry now. But certainly since the westernized tag, Indian cinema or Bollywood was a way and means of people that were labor forces or drivers, taxi drivers, rickshaw drivers, for them to save that little bit of money and 100, 150 rupees and go and watch it in a single screen cinema with no air conditioning, but escape the reality for 3 hours. And I think that was another reason why our parents in the 70s used to make that 4-bus journey to go all the way from Croydon to Southall, because A, it connected them to the country that they left behind. B, they felt represented by these kind of stars that were telling stories that they wanted to tell. And C, it was like, you know, we can go there and be who we want in that cinema for 3 hours and not worry about any of the aggression or the racism or whatever.
The role that cinema played, once a week there was a place, and it's like this dark planet, and then there's this place that's a cinema, and you were just being enveloped in this magic. And so all the rest of the week, you didn't see anything like that. You never saw Indian images, you never heard Indian language.
In the 70s, I was a child. I was 7 when I came into the country. We used to come to Southall. We used to drive from Slough in my dad's car. The whole family would come to see a movie in one of the 3 Southall cinemas. They had Century, Liberty and Dominion. So depending on what was on, what movie was on, we'd go to a particular cinema, buy the tickets, get some samosas and watch the movie.
I was the eldest of 3 children. Both my brother and I, we were a bit of a cinema buff anyway. So on Saturday afternoons, matinee shows, my brother and I would just go to the cinema, and if there was a family going, we would just tag along and just watch black and white movies, and absolutely loved it.
The Indians always went as a family. Some of them would take their own food with them and virtually have a picnic while they're watching the film.
The Dominion cinema in Southall is such an iconic landmark. It was a space that brought the South Asian community together. It was not just the films themselves, but it was also the cinema spaces, the cinema halls that became crucibles for social interaction.
It would be a big deal to come in, watch them. Everyone would get dressed up. I remember my mum would get her hair dyed and get it permed. She'd have a full face of makeup on, and this was the trip to the cinema in Southall.
Commonest thing was samosa and Coke. They used to have Coke bottles in those days, and the Coke was really shoot up your nose fizzy.
People always used to get there early and in good time, so then they could meet and chat and have a cup of tea. So outside at the foyer.
The dances, the songs, and if you didn't cry in film, the film wasn't good enough.
It gave you positive role models, which you didn't have in society in general. So in that respect, you became a little bit more confident in yourself, that you were Asian, and you started to value yourself.
They were a very intrinsic part of our cultural and our social life and language, how we stayed in touch.
Fantasy, connection for many people with a place they've left, a way of reinforcing culture and social connections. So it wasn't just a film, it was the experience around it.
So it was like a revolutionary thing. Before that, we just had what was on television, and there was nothing, no Indian movies. And I think parents wanted to see the movies, and they wanted their children to maintain links with their language and culture. So maybe they thought they were educating their children at the same time.
The girls went to look at the boys, and the boys definitely went to look at the girls. It was like that, and it was the only time you could do that. The only other place that ever happened was in the Gurdwara, but of course that was, you know, a very different thing. But often you'd see the same people at the Gurdwara, and so you'd basically have a relationship that lasted a Sunday.
You could then buy music, which were initially cassettes. So Southall Broadway was the place to go. A meat shop would be selling meat, and then the chap would be selling cassettes along the side.
Just that era was special. That time will never return.
The end of the cinemas really kind of, for a while, Southall was depressed. It was officially depressed and it was horrible to come to it.
I didn't even know all of these, cinemas were shut down. So to hear that and for a community to be almost pushed to the side is such a horrible thing.
People would be out eating, they'd talk about the latest film. That drastically changed when VHS came, but that created another scene. Vibrant people would be watching just maybe like 3 or 4 Bollywood films a day. I have one aunt, he used to watch like 6 films a day. Completely bonkers.
VHS tapes literally spelt the death knell of cinema halls in Southall. And it became unviable for, cinema halls at that time to continue screening films.
Part of the thing is that from an economic point of view, to go and pay to see a film was quite expensive. It was cheaper than mainstream cinema, but when video films came, particularly on cassettes, people just, I think, got drunk on it. It was so easy to get so many films.
Suddenly there was like an influx of Hindi movies, suddenly Punjabi, because at the cinema there was a lot of Punjabi films because they were put on the video format. So in a way, just like they said that video killed the radio star, it's like video killed the Indian cinema down here, because all of a sudden on Southall Broadway, everywhere popped up a video store. We used to go to people's weddings, and at the weddings you used to get all these live bands which all got recorded, and not everybody had a video player and that lot, so sometimes you'd go around to this person's house and see it. That was another exciting thing, is everybody wanted to see the video, see themselves on TV. And
even from a really young age, I would just put my mum's wedding video on, and all of the music, I think because it's within you and within your soul and where you come from, you instantly resonate with it.
This area of Southall had more VHSs than anywhere else in the world, just because of the fact that people wanted the players so they could associate with home.
Growing up, we watched movies all the time, and we used to go to a local corner shop that we had to pick up the latest movie on VCR.
But sometimes people used to come over and ask, what videos do you have? So then you could pass on a video to them and they could pass on your video, so you got even more value for money.
With the cinema, everything was very chaste, very, very decent, very honourable. There'd be villains who'd always try and rip the sari off the, the heroine, all that kind of stuff, but that was about it. But now, with videos, children were exposed to a lot more. Horror films, porn, all sorts of stuff.
I remember us having a huge VHS player with the buttons that you press down and you could hear the mechanism of the tape. We had a local VHS store called Bindi Video in Southall, and I used to walk there with my mum all the time. Once inside, I'd run to the shelf where they had 4 or 5 English films, and I'd constantly be overruled with a stack of Indian films. In particular, I was a big fan of horror Bollywood films. Looking back now, they seem comical, but at the time I was terrified.
Every week I would get to Tamil and sometimes Malayalam films, sometimes Hindi films on these kind of dodgy videotapes, and come home, you watch a bit of Neighbours, then you might watch a Tamil film. Or on weekends, you'd say, okay, this is my 3 hours going towards watching this film. And the latest releases would somehow come to us in these kind of bootleg copies, and we'd watch them.
They didn't have the money to buy a VHS player, but they had just enough to rent and just enough to feel like they're back in Punjab and back in South Asia. For me, it just has to be written about.
So I think that in this day and age, we still don't have the representation we like in terms of transparency, in terms of the voices and the types of people we see that reflect British society as it is. So it is important for initiatives that come about that recognise heritage and support specific pockets of our population. And hopefully we will live in a time where we don't need these kind of initiatives. But now, more than ever, I think we should focus on rising talent and give them the kick to get out there.
If you don't tell your own story, somebody else will try and tell your story for you.
I think now the important thing is to tell the stories of our experiences here. The second and third generation and the fourth generation now. I think they will then become universal to cinema goers, no matter what your background is.
The only time we see brown people are usually playing cliches. We might have a one-off show, like Goodness Gracious Me, or you'll have like Mr. Khan. But even that is taking the piss, because we're still at the butt of the joke.
When it comes to Asian people, you do see a lot of narratives dealing with storylines like honor killing or arranged marriage or something like this. And I don't dispute those storylines. I find those storylines interesting and captivating and valid as well, because they are reflections of what happens in society. But maybe I want to see more, you know? Maybe I want to see people who look like me playing varied characters.
I remember being at drama school and one of my tutors said to me, oh, so if you went to an audition, would you be a doctor? I remember thinking, like, it's really horrible to be put in a box.
Let's be infinite with the possibilities here. I can be anything. If you're casting a bohemian artist, if you're casting a hippie, why can't I play it, you know? But it's not an Asian or a black person or a Chinese person isn't the first person that comes to mind when you think of certain characters, which is a shame, and that does need to change.
Cinema, radio, the arts, I think it's a great way to voice what you're thinking, what you're feeling, converting those feelings into thoughts, to be able to voice a message, to get people together and to be able to make people think outside of the box.
I think Bend It Like Beckham's big, apart from the title, obviously, but its biggest success was the universality of it. It wasn't just about a girl that wanted to play football. It was about anybody and everybody that had dreamed to do something. It told the non-Asian audience that we were the same as you. We have the same dreams, we have the same aspirations, we have the same journeys, we have the same issues, and it made assimilation of our community much better than it has been prior to that point.
And I hope the younger generation of filmmakers is taking this as a cue and saying, well, if a film like The Big Sick can come out and it represents in some ways how America and American Asians are assimilating, and it can be made to that kind of standard, so can we in the UK, and we need to aspire to doing something like that.
One of the main reasons why the charity Make a Difference Entertainment exists is the underrepresentation of British Asians and Black people in the film and TV sector. We aim to produce film works that make our participants more employable and reduce prejudices amongst audiences about minority communities.
The way that cinema can help forward kind of assimilation into communities, cultural diversity, or even immigrant stories or whatever is perfectly proven in, I think, what you guys are trying to do here also. And I think the way forward is to collectively tell these stories.
I hope that we're telling our stories in a non-cliched way, and we're trying to help people see things in a different light.
I wanted to write about a Bollywood star. I felt like I could relate to that, and I felt like I could relate to someone who wanted to be an actress and who wanted to do something out of the ordinary.
When it came to writing this, I was like, okay, first of all, let's try and identify some social issues. Immediately, if you do any research on Southall, you're going to come across like the battles with the National Front. And I was thinking, how can we talk about this in a way that hasn't ever been talked about?
The easiest summary of my script is kind of like a South Asian version of Boyhood, but very succinct. The process of a girl growing up in Southall, much like myself, so I drew on certain experiences and things I could remember, and how film and going to the cinema was central to that.
With the film, obviously, it's dealing with a lot of issues. It's dealing with interracial dating. It's dealing with homosexual relationship. A love story that's rooted in truth.
I think the greatest thing about giving young people the opportunity to express them creatively is that they have no filter. They haven't been given guidelines. They haven't said this is not possible. If you give them the powerful weapon that I call a camera and a microphone, God knows what they're going to be able to create and bring together and change.
I think it's just really cool, like, of the scale of it, because I've never been on something like this where we had our own set before. We've always been filming in like colleges or like our houses.
We are filming on a fully functional set that has been designed for the scripts we have written. That's insane. And we're filming on 4K, which means I have to cover this up with a lot of makeup, because you can see everything.
Being made and this cultural heritage project is an amazing opportunity for me. Really incredible, because if you're not getting the auditions or if you're not getting the jobs because it is so competitive and there's such a limited amount of them out at the moment, why don't you create your own opportunities, create your own things to act in? Here, straight away, I was given a platform to film it and expose it to an audience, which is like a blessing.
I'm honoured to be here. And I think it's a great opportunity. I think every young person that wants to do something in media or performing arts, you know, should try and find organisations like this.
All my problems, honestly, have been answered from starting this project. Like, honestly, like my worries have just gone away. I feel so grateful to be in a room like this because I've never had it before, and like people actually want to listen to what you're saying, and like I'm such an emotional person anyway, but honestly, like I can't tell you how grateful I am. Like it's so great. So don't, because I actually might cry, so just don't.
I feel like this project has put down barriers because it's helped me connect more with my culture. And I've learned things that I never would have learned like without actually doing this project.
Through this process, I did get a lot closer to my parents, stories about where they came from and their youth. I took a lot of inspiration from my father and my mother in this. And I feel a great sense of I'm making them proud by doing this.
You appreciate all types of culture that celebrate who you are, because that helps you understand your place in the world. It helps you understand how to have self-respect and to really take pride in yourself as a person, as opposed to thinking of yourself as the other.
I think I'm evolving actually as a person and as a human being. So to be in touch with my roots and to gain all of this information from all of these wonderful people, it's been really liberating.
It's important for young filmmakers to express their own voice because that's what the creative industry is about. It's about expressing yourself and also letting other people experience it in the way that you see the world. And I think that's really important because it shows a new light to everyone that watches it.
Cinema is really important in that it shows you that actually India is an amazing place, and it's not like coming to England means that you've come to a better place. It's different, and yeah, there are different opportunities, but where you come from is just as brilliant and is just as amazing and has its unique, special things about it that you must never forget, because they really do contribute to who you are and your identity.
I've always disregarded the fact that I was Indian, so now that I'm fully enjoying it, I feel really lucky to work with these people. And because it's something that I missed out on, I feel really lucky. So I think, yeah, it's a really good feeling. These are happy tears. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. I just feel really blessed and grateful.
As I've grown up, I've realised actually it's a beautiful place to be from, and I'm proud that I'm from Southall.